Yes. So as the prompt says, this meeting is being recorded and will be made available later on our YouTube channel so that you can go back and refresh yourselves on the content we've discussed. We have an interesting array of speakers: speech and language therapist, counselling psychologist, and developmental paediatrician, covering aspects of neurodiversity in education. And leading us off, our first speaker is Gemma Arnold, speech and language therapist, currently working in the NHS in the UK. Thank you, Gemma.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just getting used to sharing on Zoom. I'm not used to it, so I'm just gonna 1 second. So yes, I'm going to be talking today a bit about speech, language, and communication needs, with a focus on sort of 11 to 18. It's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, so I've also got some supporting information just to signpost you to have a look at in your own time. So what I'm going to start off with is just thinking a bit about when we talk about speech, language, and communication needs, how we break that down a bit. So we're talking about 3 main areas. The first area being speech, which is really the mechanics. So it's the sounds we use. It's how fluently we speak, or whether maybe we stammer. And it's also things like the quality of our voice, our intonation, and other things like motor characteristics. So whether maybe we have weakness, which makes us slur our speech, things like that. And then there's the language, which is the content. So that can be vocabulary and grammar. It can be more abstract language. So, you know, double meanings. It can be how we put all that information together to make narratives and stories. And it's also the higher level language. So language we use for things like making inferences, problem solving, and things like that. And then the third area is how we use that speech and that language to communicate. So are we able to have conversations? Are we able to communicate assertively and change the way we speak depending on who we're talking to? That's what we're referring to when we say social register. So, you know, the difference, talking to a teacher in a different way to how we would talk to our friends in the playground, for example. Are we able to negotiate? And it also includes things like nonverbal communication. And you'll see voice and intonation and stress also can come into communication as well, because we can find young people who might have differences there, but more as a result of things like social understanding or mental health. And for all 3 of these areas, there's an understanding and expression. So with vocabulary, for example, you have to understand the vocabulary and it's how you use the vocabulary. With sounds, it's processing the sounds and producing the sounds. So for all of these things, there's an understanding side and an expressive side. Now, all of these different skills can impact on one another. So difficulties with the language can impact on speech, can impact on social interaction, and vice versa. There's a lot of, you know, it's very fluid, and all of these different things can impact on one another. On top of that, there's other key differences or difficulties which can have an impact on communication that we really need to consider. So that's things like attention, mental health, social insight and understanding, memory skills, and impulsivity. So if we use the example of attention or impulsivity, I think we've all possibly been in a position where somebody's talking to us. We haven't really been very present. We haven't been listening. And sort of 2 minutes later, we're sort of saying, oh, sorry, what was it you said? So we haven't been able to take in really what they've said. So difficulties with attention can obviously impact on that. So your ability to take in information and process it. Difficulties with memory are, for me, is a big focus with memory, because it really underpins understanding and processing of information. So any young people you come across who've got difficulties with memory, or sort of cognitive skills, you can generally, it's quite a safe bet that they will have difficulties with language and processing those types of skills. And then obviously difficulties with social insight and social understanding can impact on how young people communicate, or their wish to communicate, I suppose you could say. So as well as thinking about the actual speech language communication skills, it's really important that we consider these other factors when we're thinking about young people, really, and how to support them. So what do you say? We're saying it's complex, but I guess try not to get too bogged down in how complex it is. The important thing is that you have an awareness, I think, and I'm sure within the group there's a varying levels of awareness of these different things. But the important thing is you have an awareness and you're interested to find out more. It's really, really important to think about those impacting factors that we mentioned in that previous slide. So things like mental health, attention, memory, and thinking about them in terms of how you support a young person. So, you know, where do you start? What's a priority for that young person? So, for example, there's no point working on certain language skills if you've got a young person who really struggles with memory. You've really got to address memory alongside those language skills. Or, you know, if you've got a young person who really hasn't got social interest or isn't motivated, maybe putting them in a group to work on social skills isn't going to something that's potentially going to work so well for them. So it's just always really important to think about what order, or what do I need to target first, or what do I need to work at alongside these different skills. And the final thing to think about is really, you know, thinking about what's functional for a young person. So what's important, what's going to make the most difference to this young person at this time? You know, is it working on something they're interested in, or something potentially they want to do in the future, and kind of addressing their language to do with that area? So just thinking about them holistically. So moving on until we're supporting how to support speech language communication needs. And I've said in the classroom, but really it's in any environment. And there's two main factors that I want to focus on. So it's the communication partner, so that's you, or other teaching staff, or parents, or siblings. And it's also the communication supportive environment. I'm not going to go into too much detail about communication supportive environments, but what I am going to do is, and I'm assuming these slides will be sent around, is signpost you to some really helpful resources, free resources. And what these are the first one is a checklist you can use to sort of audit your environment and how communication friendly it is. And the second one is similar, but it also has a lot of information on how to make your environment more communication friendly. So just because of the time constraints, I'm not going to go into lots more detail on that. What I am going to talk a bit about is, as communication partners, things that's really important to consider. So some of the factors that's really important to think about are how much you talk, because obviously the more we talk, the less space we leave for young people to talk and share their ideas. It's thinking about how much language we use, how complex the languages we use, how complex or new vocabulary is. I know with a lot of young people I work with, and a lot of teachers and other professionals, we can really take for granted words that we expect young people to know that they don't. So it's always worth checking, especially key vocabulary like emotion vocabulary, vocabulary to do with the time is a really good thing to check. Thinking about how much time you leave for young people to think about what they want to say, and how much time you leave for them to talk, as we mentioned a bit before. And a big one is thinking about questions that you ask. So do you tend to ask quite simple, concrete questions? Or do you tend to ask more thinking, kind of abstract questions? And again, I'm going to provide some information on that for you to have a look at in your own time. And in terms of some top tips, so in general, these are the top tips I always really go to. And it's when you are talking, it's trying to keep it to the point as possible, so short and using simple language. And in the supporting materials, I'm going to provide you, there's information on simplifying your questions, thinking about the vocabulary you use and how simple that is. Really backing up what you say. So, you know, writing it down, using gestures or signs or visuals, thinking about the order you say things in. So we have a tendency to sort of be quite complex in the way we speak, but actually saying things in the order you want a young person to do it. So instead of saying, before you go to the library, go and get your shoes, you would say, go and get your shoes, then go to the library. Making sure you do pause and do give the young person time to think. So this has actually been, thinking time has been shown to be one of the most effective strategies for supporting processing and language. Generally, we probably give about 1 second of thinking time. But actually, if you can try and extend that out a little bit and give maybe 3 to 5 seconds even, it's going to feel really weird, but it's been shown to be a really effective strategy to really giving young people time to think about what you've said and respond. Repeat, repeat, repeat. So I'm sure you're aware the sort of it takes about 17 times to hear a new word for somebody to actually learn it and remember it. And I think those 17 times have to be, you know, different ways and different settings, but any new information, it's important that it's repeated in different ways and meaningful ways. One of my biggest bugbears is checking understanding. So being really cautious about not saying, do you understand? I'm sure what you've experienced and what we see a lot of is young people who either don't want to admit they don't understand because they don't want to look silly in front of their peers, or they're you know, don't want to hurt their pride, or young people who actually don't always realize they don't understand. So they'll just say yes if you ask them that question. Do you understand? Yeah, I understand. And next thing you know, they've definitely not understood. So instead of doing that, saying, can you tell me back in your own words what you need to do? Or what did you understand by what I said? And the final one here, especially with teenagers, is this importance of metacognition. And what that means, I'm sure many of you know what that means, is teaching them to kind of be independent and learn strategies to support their own communication. So one of the examples I've included on the next slide, sorry, it's quite small, but again, when you see it on your own screens, hopefully it will help. This is a sheet of memory tips that I put together for some of the teenagers I work with. But those with sort of better language skills. But what it does is it takes them through different strategies and explains them. And then there's an activity at the end where they have to kind of think about what strategies they might use, what works best for them. So for a lot of teenagers, it's really important to actually, they get to the point where they really need to start thinking about, how am I going to support my own communication skills? And just to say, when you are thinking about changing something, or you are thinking about, you know, how do I talk to the young people I work with, or how is my environment, you know, what do I need to change? A really important first step is audit. So going in, observing, looking at what you're doing well, and maybe looking at those areas that you would like to do a bit more of. Setting yourself an objective, but start small. It doesn't have to be lots of different things. So for example, saying, right, we're going to really work on checking understanding. Think about how you're going to know if it's working. What are you going to see? So will it be, you know, you'll get fewer hands up when you've explained the task? Will it be there's less disruption? Will it be the students have better understanding of the task? Giving yourself a timescale to implement it and revisiting it regularly, and then evaluating it. So this kind of cycle, think, plan, study, do, is been shown to be really effective. And again, like I said, just to reiterate, it doesn't have to be a big thing. You could just be focusing on one strategy, for example, and it can make a massive difference. So just to signpost you to finish off, I'm just going to signpost you to some more resources. This is a great website. It's got resources for parents and professionals. Most of them are based in the UK, but there's some really good free resources there for all ages, teenagers, younger children, babies, and like I said, for professionals and parents. And just to say, I've included some bits at the end, so there's some bits to read through in your own time. So there's what you would typically expect at different ages. Teenagers. And then there's also just some information about adapting language complexity. So like I said, there's a bit of information when we're thinking about questions, how to simplify them or which questions are simpler, and vocabulary. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Gemma. That was very thoughtful and well presented. Could you see that I was taking my thinking time, 3 to 5 seconds, not the Wi-Fi dropping out and causing troubles. As an introduction to those who missed the beginning, Gemma is a speech and language therapist who has an extensive profile of working with children and young people with communication needs, and kindly joined us from the UK today to give this talk. And I'm now going to hand over to Kezia Guy, a counselling psychologist working in Trinidad and Tobago. She's going to tell us a little bit more about herself and also speak about some common conditions that we see in the classroom, give us all a little bit of additional strategies that we need to think about, and start bringing this talk through to our context. Thank you, Kezia.
Thank you, Gemma. Oh, thank you, Stacey. Sorry. Thank you, Gemma, once again for the follow-up from my session to now. I'll take off my video because I think I will have a lag in my my internet connection where I'm at. So my name is Kezia Guy. My background is in forensic settings, i.e. the prison. It's also with the migrant community here in Trinidad and Tobago. So let's say, for instance, everyone who came across to Venezuela who may have a UNHCR card, those are the ones that I have to interact with and give assistance to. Outside of that, I also do private work with children who are diagnosed with neurodevelopmental disorders. And I also work with the Ministry of Education on that behalf. So we're going to start with ADHD. Let me see, I'm having a little stick. Right, so we're going to start with ADHD, and ADHD is not just a disorder that is characterized by one diagnosis. There's the inattentive side, and there's also the impulsive and hyperactive section of ADHD. And sometimes a child can be diagnosed with the inattentive or the impulsive, and sometimes they may have a combined diagnosis with both inattentive and impulsive characteristics being shown for that specific period of time that that diagnosis needs to be seen and the level of severity it will be at. So on the inattentiveness, they're having a short attention span, they make careless mistakes, they appear forgetful, they are unable to stick to tasks, appear to be unable to listen or carry out instructions, constantly changing activities or tasks, having difficulty organizing tasks. So these are kids who are sometimes very disorganized, kids who are very forgetful. I know in the Caribbean, we say to our kids, if stick break in your ears, right? So these are the kids who may have that issue or who may need to be diagnosed with that diagnosis of ADHD inattention. Also, we have the hyperactivity and impulsiveness, being unable to sit still, especially in a calm and quiet surrounding, constantly fidgeting, being unable to concentrate on tasks, also acting without thinking, excessive physical movement or talking. And honestly, as a psychologist within the Ministry of Education, within other sectors of Trinidad and Tobago, I always encourage my teachers to set up clear rules with their children once they are inattentive. One of the reasons being is that once rules are set, eventually, as they get accustomed to the consequences, they agree on the rules with their teacher, we see some level of self-monitoring going forward. So self-monitoring meaning that our kids get to a point where they check themselves and their behavior due to the rules and consequences attached to them. Also limiting distractions in the classroom environment. One easy way that I tell my teachers to limit distractions is to understand your diagnosed ADHD child, understand which parts of the curriculum gives them issues, and knowing which times the school may be loud, knowing which times the school may have a lot of noise. You can adjust the curriculum to teach the easier subjects that may be easier for your ADHD child at a certain time where the class is quieter and the school is quieter, the harder ones, and then the easier ones when the school is a little bit louder. Keeping a routine every day for our children with ADHD is very important also, giving important breaks. So most times with our inattention and hyperactivity combined diagnosis, we see where our kids need breaks. We sometimes give them breaks, or we will break things up into chunks. So let's say, for instance, there are 20 questions. We let them do 1 to 5. Then they come to you as a teacher. You look at the work, then they do 6 to 10. Then they come back to you, and then they do that until they get to 20. It takes a longer period of time, but it's way easier than just asking that child who may have that issue to get all this work done. It may be impossible at that time unless intervention is being given to that child and that family. Along with ADHD, one of the main things that helps a lot is to work with the family and the teachers and the school along with that child, because we realize that that 360-degree type of intervention really assists in the livelihood of the child, the improvement of the symptoms that we see. It also helps with them being able to be more independent and autonomous, even though they live with something that may be a little bit strenuous to get to that place of independence. So one of the myths with ADHD, some say ADHD is something you grow out of as you reach to adulthood. Rather than ADHD symptoms getting better as a person reaches adulthood, they can get worse, and it can be the first time the symptoms have been noticed as a problem. As young people reach adulthood, life is more complex and expectations are often greater. Yet, the support and supervision that was available when younger may be reduced or lost, making it harder to cope. It is now recognized that ADHD is a lifespan disorder, meaning it can continue throughout the life, although symptoms may reduce or increase across the decades. So this is one myth that we sometimes have in the Caribbean, where we think that as you age, your ADHD symptoms may not be as bad, but once again, that's not true. So let's go on to number 2. ADHD isn't a serious disorder that can really damage your life. So that's a myth. Untreated or inadequately treated ADHD can severely affect learning, working life, domestic life, relationships, and social life. Many people with ADHD can function extremely well, but there are many people with ADHD who struggle to cope with life. ADHD is associated with lower levels of educational achievement and lower levels of employment with the history of frequent job changes. Studies of people with ADHD have shown they are significantly more likely to have been arrested and twice as more likely to be divorced, as well as being less satisfied with their family, social, and professional lives. ADHD is also associated with an increase in serious traffic road accidents. And then we are on number 3 on our myths of ADHD. You must overcome ADHD symptoms with working hard. So sometimes in the Caribbean, we have an assumption that despite our diagnoses, that we just have to put in the extra work to get certain things done, despite our shortcomings. And for ADHD, this is a myth. So it is true that many of the symptoms of ADHD are experienced sometimes by all people. However, one of the characteristics that makes someone warrant a diagnosis of ADHD is if the problems it causes are present all the time. Long term, and to such a severe extent that it makes it hard to function in life. So these symptoms have to be pervasive. They have to be interfering with the way that we function, has to interfere with our education.
This meeting is being recorded.
Our livelihood, it affects our marriages or relationships. So that is the only time we see it as ADHD once it's that severe. And also we cannot work hard and overcome the symptoms of ADHD. So now we are on to ASD,
Recording in progress.
disorders. And within autism spectrum disorder, we see a delay language skill, as my colleague Gemma was saying earlier about the speech. We see delayed movement skills, delayed cognitive or learning skills. Sometimes see hyperactivity, impulsivity, and or inattention, epilepsy or seizure disorders, unusual mood or emotional reactions, right? So one of the things I tell my teachers would be to limit sensory overload within the classroom, similar to the strategy that was done for ADHD, where we teach certain subjects at specific times, where we also allow for that time for our children to have a break. If they have atypical sensory needs, we provide whatever toy that they may need to hold on to, whatever drawings they may need to do. These are ways that we try to accommodate children with ASD within the school system in Trinidad and Tobago. Using rewards and incentives is another one. Using structure and trying not to deviate from the schedule of the classroom activities. Once again, our ASD students or ASD children, they do not do well with our transition times. They do not do well with changes in their schedule. And this is something that I always tell my teachers to use. When you are moving from one subject to another, I always do or ask them or train them on the countdown method. So you start and you say 5 minutes, and then we move on to, and then you say the subject. Then you say 3 minutes, and then we move on to. So this is more or less a way of getting that child who may be a little bit uneasy with transitions, maybe a little bit uneasy with change, get them accustomed to that change so that they hear you saying that the change is coming. This could in some way limit the uneasiness as it relates to the transition from one subject area to another. Being calm and positive extends to all aspects of neurodevelopmental disorders. I cannot stress this enough. Being calm, being positive at all times, giving praise is always something that is needed throughout these disorders, and even for children who may not be diagnosed. Praise, calm, positivity is always encouraged. Use a simple way of discussing issues with our kids. So we're not going to discuss issues using medical jargon. We're not going to discuss issues using words that they are not accustomed to. We discuss the issues, role playing for social learning and all these other things in the classroom. We use their language. We use language of their age group where they are accustomed to, and they would understand everything that's being said. As it relates to myths of ASD, so one myth, everyone with autism is either nonverbal or savant. So that's a myth. Fact, ASD is a neurodevelopmental disorder that occurs on a spectrum. According to the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, ASD is characterized by deficits in social communication and interaction across contexts, and restrictive and repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities. So more or less repeated behavior, repeated interests is seen. These impairments, however, vary widely in terms of severity, impact in daily living, and effects on classroom performance. Language deficits, for instance, can range from impaired social communication to poor comprehension or lack of speech entirely. So this is the spectrum that we speak about as it relates to autism spectrum disorder. It goes from a high, and then it goes down as the speech dissipates. Some adults with ASD are able to live independently, while others require a great deal of support. The diagnosis of ASD covers a broad range of functioning and includes the former diagnosis of Asperger's disorder, childhood disintegrative disorder, and pervasive developmental disorder. So once again, ASD, now it's a spectrum disorder. All of these disorders listed before, so that's Asperger's, CDD, and PDD, they are all on that spectrum with autism, right? So just imagine a line and different markers on each line, which create a disorder based on the severity as we go down that line. So it is important for teachers to provide students with personalized interventions that are based on their unique patterns of needs rather than their diagnosis alone. And this is something that Ministry of Education has done with the employment of behavioral specialists, clinical psychologists, and school psychologists, where they create their individualized educational plan from the use of the psychoeducational assessment. Special ed also does their screeners, and also from the behavioral specialists, create a behavioral plan and a behavioral assessment. And that is tailored to one specific child. Yes, Stacey, am I going over time? Oh, sorry. Okay. So we would move on to conduct disorders. So conduct disorders come with a range of issues. They include physical aggression. How much time do I have, Stacey?
Well, minus 3 minutes.
Oh, all right.
So we can give you a couple more minutes, and then we'll move on to the next talk.
Awesome. All right.
Yeah.
So I'll be quick. So we're on to conduct disorders. So conduct disorders, we have physical aggression. These are the characteristics that you need to see at a severe point, and also for a certain amount of time for it to be seen as a conduct disorder diagnosis. So it's physical aggression, violating others' rights, lying or manipulating others or a situation, delinquent behavior, bullying, threatening, cheating, vandalism. Some of the strategies that I give to my teachers in the classroom is to know which battles you are going to fight. You have to stay calm at all times when dealing with children who may show signs of conduct disorder or who may be diagnosed. Systematically teach social skills is another way of role playing in the classroom when you have downtime, and allowing children to act out how they would behave in a specific situation that may cause emotional flare-ups, or even situations where the school maybe would not be able to function because of how severe the behavior is. So we allow our kids to act out that behavior in the classroom, in an environment with the teachers, so that we could go through their emotions with them. One of the myths of conduct disorder would be conduct disorder is the result of no discipline. No, it's not the result of no discipline. Lax discipline doesn't cause conduct disorder, but consistent parenting that sets clear limits and clear consequences for misbehavior, coupled with positive reinforcement and desired behaviors, can make a big difference in the lives of our kids. So it's more or less work that we have to get into to get our kids who may have conduct disorder to that place where they can have a normal life in the school environment or even at home. Another myth is that conduct disorder is a result of too much discipline. That's a myth. So fact, very harsh discipline is sometimes linked to genesis of conduct disorder, but many children who develop it come from families with ordinary parenting styles. What helps children with the disorder to behave better is consistent discipline in the context of warm parental relationships. And my third myth and fact, parents want their children on medicine so they'll be docile. This is another one where we have seen our children in Trinidad and Tobago who may need medication, and sometimes our parents may be a little bit against the idea of medication. So the fact is, medication isn't a treatment recommended for conduct disorder, but it may be helpful when kids also have other disorders, such as depression, ADHD, PTSD. When it is used, it should be in cases where the child's life is seriously impaired. So they are unable to settle in school, they are unable to learn parts of the curriculum, they are unable to retain things in the classroom because they are unable to sit still and take in the information. People who accuse parents.
Thank you, Kezia.
Yes, so thank you, everyone. So I'm on the last one. Thank you.
That was a really interesting myth-busting session. and we'll have the information available for everyone on the call post. That was really useful. And we're going to move swiftly on to Dr. Narad Mathura, a developmental paediatrician who works in the UK. I will allow him 30 seconds to introduce himself, and he will be our last talk before we have a few minutes for questions. So over to you, Dr. Mathura.
Hello, hopefully you can hear me. We're having a bit of connection issues. And there's an echo. Can you see me? Yes? Okay. So my name is Dr. Narad Mathura, and Stacey, just wondering if you can mute my phone.
Yeah, we're going to mute your phone and keep your computer going.
Yeah.
Right, hopefully that's all good.
Can you hear and see my screen?
Yes, yeah. So
Okay.
all you need to do now is do slideshow and we're on and perfect.
Right, so
Or not, just continue.
can you see the slideshow?
Yes.
Okay, great. And you can hear me. Great. So great. Hi, my name is Narad Mathura. I am a consultant neurodevelopmental pediatrician. I am joint head of service with Stacey at Evelina Community Children's Services. We do a lot of neurodevelopmental work, and I, like Stacey, I'm also from Trinidad. I've been in the UK for several years, pursuing neurodevelopmental and pediatric medicine, and my foundation training was at Mount Hope Eric Williams Medical Sciences Complex. So I'm going to give you an overview of neurodiversity in adolescence. So both Gemma and Kezia gave a beautiful talk around conditions in language, in ADHD and autism, and what it might present like for you all in the classroom, particularly when you're seeing these children. So what I would like to do is take you on a journey of childhood development and what are the triggers in the child's environment, in the child's physical health and in their ecological environment that might affect them. And we know childhood development, all of you on the call, it's a process from birth all the way through to adolescence and in early adulthood that has a stable progression. It's dependent on the previous stage of development. It's a continuous process, but this can be variable. There are several factors that need to be in place for this to happen. And we know this is all around the ecological environment of the child: health, nutrition, safety, security, early learning, a responsive caregiver, that play between nurture and nature, what's happening. And, it's really true when they say it takes a whole village. And
Narad and Stacey, I think you've both frozen. Are you back with us?
Right, I'm
Both
I'm
froze
here.
then.
Can you hear me now? Am I back?
Yes.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, we can hear you, Stacey.
We've interrupted half of Narad's story in terms of early development. Hopefully he'll be able to rejoin soon. So one of the things that we talk about when we're thinking about childhood development is that biopsychosocial model, in terms of thinking about the biology, in terms of the environment the child is developing in, and this.
All right, we may have lost Stacey a little bit there as well. Let's just give her a few seconds to see if that works. Well, I'm seeing Narad.
That we know that Narad is back, but we also know that, for example, you need certain experiences in order to develop certain skills. And whilst he's getting his PowerPoint up, what that means, for example, is at an elemental level, a child who can't hear is unable to develop good speech. Hearing the responses to the sounds that they made. And I'm going to hand you back over to Dr. Mathura.
All right, so we're gonna have to figure out which
Narad,
audio to use for him. It's
Narad, we can't hear you.
PC.
So I think we might need phone.
How about
audio.
here?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
So I'm on phone audio and I'm on video. Okay.
There
Yeah.
you
Sorry about this. I'm supposed to be the one in the first world country, right? So what happens, you know, and can you see my slides?
Yes, the slides are up.
Yep, we can see we can see them. So you need to transition. You're still on your first slide on this.
How about now? Has that changed?
Yeah, perfect. We're on the second one. Yeah.
Okay, so this slide shows us that, you know, all of these traumas can lead to different challenges and physical challenges within the child's life that can affect them from early on, language, attachment, and then later on the risks around when they become adolescents in terms of their emotional and mental health. Social problems can lead to unemployment and incarceration, and, you know, their cognitive deficits, you know, can they find the right work that they need to have? And this cycle of stress and neurodevelopmental disruption impacts on all of your systems. Okay, so it eventually leads to reduced health outcomes later on. Now, we know that the impact of trauma impacts on different parts of the brain, the reward part, the memory part, and threat. But let's conceptualize this a little bit more practically. So the foundation building blocks of development are things like the fundamental processes, our memory, how fast we think and figure out things, our attention when we're doing this, how we can block out other distractions, so that's inhibition, and how we coordinate all of that from using our senses like our eyes and our ears to kind of manipulate our environment and do what we need to do. And then there are higher level learning, language, and spatial skills, followed by even more executive and overall functioning high order skills of achievement, cognitive abilities, and executive functioning, social emotional bits. Now, imagine if you just remove one of these foundational fundamental processes. So if you remove one of these blocks like attention, or you remove one of those blocks like memory, what's going to happen with the other blocks on top of it? They will topple down, and it impacts on your language and your learning and all of the bits that are about there in terms of your achievement, your cognitive ability, and your reasoning. How do you manage your differences? And this is where neurodevelopmental disorders and differences come in. There are a range of them. We heard about ASD, ADHD, intellectual disability, but we mustn't forget things like drug abuse, that's the addiction cycle, sleep disorders, aggression, OCD, PTSD, and depression, all of which can present as challenging behavior, criminality, and, you know, difficult upbringings. The rate at which neurodevelopmental disorders exist in the world is shown here. It's an increasing trend, with anxiety and depressive disorders quite high up, and particularly in our region of the Americas, the prevalence is 12.8 compared to the rest of the world. And if we take a look at what this looks like in terms of middle and lower income countries, we can see that definitely, well, Trinidad is classified as a high income country in terms of the World Bank setting, but in terms of in each country, there's a range of socioeconomic experience. So, you know, that prevalence, for example, like ADHD in the top line there, is about 2.8%, 0.6% for ASD, and increasing every day. But more importantly, these neurodevelopmental conditions, what we see is the behaviors that they present as, and we must figure out what this behavior is. The first thing, so behaviors like fever, we need to find where it's coming from. And I'm just checking that you can still hear me and see my slides.
Yes.
Okay, great. And we need to find out what it is. And at the bottom of all of it, it's usually because the child is trying to communicate with us, and it's something related to their anxiety. And this is for all ages of children, particularly these adolescent children. They either hold their feelings in, they introvert them, and they keep them in, they don't show us, or it comes out as anxiety or quite physical reactions or emotional reactions or depressive low mood, which we need to figure out. Now, there are three conditions I just wanted to touch on: intellectual disability, ADHD, ASD, which is autism spectrum disorder, and communication, to kind of bring this to light in telling you what it looks like. So intellectual disability, we know that this is an impairment in kind of understanding your environment, functioning in your environment, and practically managing in your environment. Now, there are a range of etiologies, and in most cases, 50% of the children, we don't know what it is, but it impacts on their education, their social skills, and their life skills. And you know, the thing about this is that we know that if we have early intervention and early support from the ed psychs, early intervention at any level in terms of recognizing what social skills they may need to include them in that, that's really good. So it's about figuring out that, you know, if a child isn't coping, they're not performing well, we need to think about if it's an intellectual disability. Lots of these conditions go together: ADHD, ASD, as well as communication difficulties, quite prominent. And Kezia spoke about the criteria for that. But if we think about the trauma that's behind this, it affects different genes and different neurotransmitters in the brain. And that could be due to if there is some stress in pregnancy or stress in the maternal home environment during pregnancy, if there's inconsistent parenting, if there's conflict in the household, and is there adverse child environment, we know that this can predispose you to the gene defects that we see in ADHD. And ADHD, like all of these conditions, they go together with things like behavior, anxiety, depression, and Tourette syndrome as well. The treatment is multimodal. It can include initially, a lot of psychoeducation, recognizing those features in the child, like Kezia spoke about, and using some of those accommodations. And if that doesn't work after several cycles, we think about treatment and medication with a specialist. Communication disorders, Gemma spoke of really in detail, but what we must appreciate from it, it can impact on every area of a child's development. And it's not only thinking that the child is not able to communicate with us, but it might impact on how they're writing, in aspects of their behavior particularly. They might not figure things out the same that we do, or they might not express their emotions in the same way that we see in children who are able to communicate. With autism, we know what the features are. We know that there's an increasing prevalence. Latest figures from the USA, UK, and worldwide are on there. And this is what the trends look like, particularly from a recent UK study. What I wanted to share with you, though, is that in terms of children who present with autism, particularly in adolescence, there's a group of them. If you look at these lines, they look at the general trajectory for their social communication and behavioral abilities is on the up. So we must recognize that. These are children who are probably less able in terms of learning and language, and these are the children who are really bright and able. But there are a group of children in this line here. And when you see these kids in school, parents will say, yeah, he bright man, he could read, he know the alphabet, he could tell you all about all the planets and everything. But what they can't do is say, hi mom, hi dad, or you know, where we going now? We're going to the mall, I want some doubles. They cannot tell you use that language practically, but yet they're able to learn. So we must recognize that even though a child has these skills, they are and may be on the autism spectrum, and they may have other neurodiversities. So sometimes that fools parents into thinking everything is okay, we don't need to worry, he just taking his time to talk. The other area I wanted to tell you about is repetitive restrictive behaviors. In younger children, we recognize this really easy. They group and they order things. In older children, what happens, it presents as emotional dysregulation. It presents as self-occupation and withdrawing from what they want to do. It presents as repetition in the things that they want to do. So it might look typical, it might look normal, but it's a little more than we would expect in that age group. And what happens in a lot of these older adolescents with autism is they're able to compensate and what we call mask their symptoms. So when we see them in public, you wouldn't notice it,
But if you spend time with them, you realize that the anxiety that they have with attending school, handwriting, doing their schoolwork, going out of the house, and with their mood is really because they're masking their behaviors. So it's really noticeable in bright children. They may be bright and they may perform well at everything, but they seem sad all the time, or they seem as though the world is on their shoulders. So this is something to look out for, okay? Because it's really associated later on in life when they become adults with social anxiety, oppositional behaviors, and of course, ADHD. So really, in conclusion, it takes a village to take care of these children, from the center, the child-focused model, to the parents, to the environment, and then to the policy that we have nationally. When they are affected, it comes out as their behavior, and we need to think about their behavior as professionals. What's happening before, what's triggering it, and what might be the consequences, and what's the factors that's keeping it going around in that circle. And it could be one of these neurodevelopmental conditions. When we think about how we help these children, we don't only think about what we can do practically, but that practicality is informed by the rights of the child, what's good for the family, what's good for later on in their life, and is the context right for them? So you don't want to be a child who has learning difficulties, you don't want to push them into going into university and college, but probably just manage so that they could get their GCs in maths and English, and that gives them a fighting chance to get a trade or a skill. Early intervention is the cure in most of these areas, and that comes with government policy and funding and the wherewithal, and it starts from early on. And what we know is that these interventions, and this research comes from children looked after, is that it does have a positive outcome, positive relationships, an interaction with at least a family member who's caring, exploring their talents and interests, making positive experiences in school, working to their strengths, whatever that may be, so that they're included in their environment. Positive friendships helps them to think ahead and plan their lives. And we know that neurodevelopmental conditions, they expand through the whole range of our lifetime. And we do know that, if early detected, we can prevent more of the psychiatric and psychotic disorders that Kezia, and also language disorders that Gemma spoke about. All right, so we made it. We didn't have any connection difficulties, so I'll stay on as long as I can for that. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mathura. Thank you to all of our speakers. It's been helpful to hear about not just the characteristics of the varying neurodevelopmental disorders that we're talking about, and the challenges that our children and young people and their families may face, but also to hear about strategies that we can implement both in the classroom and at home in order to assist and to help them develop to their full potential. And I'm sure we've got many stories and histories we can share about the positive outcomes that have come from understanding the building blocks of neurodiverse conditions and the support and the way that it can be implemented. So in our last few minutes, Jared, monitoring the chat, if there are any questions, our panel are available to answer any questions.